What was it?
Oh, you said you are?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
But we may revisit, we may ask him again.
Okay. I'll leave that to the co-chairs.
We'll get that done, we'll find out. He is here, okay. David? Hi, Amy Locke, how are you?
Good, how are you?
We're ready for you when you're ready.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So, I've got a presentation here that I put together. Most of you are, I think, relatively familiar with it, so I can go over on a sort of piece-by-piece basis and go through the presentation. But what I'd much rather have is ensuring that everyone here has a chance to ask questions and for us to have a conversation. You know, I do this a lot, so I'll just start talking. And at any point you want me to stop talking and you want to start talking about that topic, let's just start talking about that topic. Just some context, about how much time do we have overall? Okay. Because I can talk for an hour nonstop, and that's not going to be fun for any of us. All right. So, you know, this is pretty standard presentation for what we give, just to sort of go through the context, but just to sort of start on this first piece. You know, we have some core pieces of the new fare collection system. Number one, first among equals, is improving the customer experience. You know, at its core, a fare collection system is only good if it gets out of the way and lets us run our actual service. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do here. And so everything that we've done has been trying to put together a system that will do that not just on day one, but over the course of the next 13 to 23 years, depending on whether we exercise options. We can talk a whole lot more if you want about the procurement methods here and what the contract looks like as well, because I think that's interesting. It's interesting to me. But I think the more important thing is what it means for our customers. So I'll go through these all in depth, but making it easier to pay, offering more convenient options, having a unified method, which is that no matter what mode you're on, you're tapping. There isn't a separate card, that there isn't a separate mag stripe card, that there isn't anything different, that there aren't different fares based on what kinds of cards you have, that all of that complexity goes away. Whether you're using your phone, whether you're using a card, whether you're using a contactless credit card, all of which will be able to be used, you're tapping, right? And that one motion is really simple. The second piece is ensuring equal access.
Okay, here's where I'm going to.
We're going to go much more deeply into this as well. So
anyway,
yeah.
I'm just concerned because the last time the T did it,
Yeah.
they did the minority community, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, did not get the access to
Yes.
a Charlie card.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and
The
then,
big brown sign that says "Sorry, no Charlie" card here that exists everywhere in every one of our stations.
No, the issue I have,
Yeah.
anyway, the issue
Yeah.
I have is you're gonna get pushback,
Yeah.
not from me, you're
Yeah.
gonna get pushback from that community
Yeah.
from square one, so you've gotta do some serious outreach.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the outreach in a little
Okay,
bit.
I
It's
see.
really important to us as well.
Right.
We've been doing some of it already. It's been sort of core to what this is because we're making big changes here. Even in some ways, they're even bigger than the first time around than the Charlie cards because we're going to remove cash from onboard vehicles, and it's a huge change, and it's a huge change, especially in poorer and minority communities who are taking the buses more. It's also a huge advantage because it means faster buses for people who need them. But yeah, so I'll talk. But equal access isn't just about you know, regardless of color or creed or how much money. It's also about accessibility, and you know that's been a really big thing for us. I'll show you the gates as well. But one of the things that I'm proud of with this is that each and every one of the gates will be more accessible. So every gate will be wider, and there will be more so-called accessible gates, and those gates as well will also be wider. So, and that's an amazing thing, not just for people who are in a wheelchair, but it's also really good for people who've got strollers or luggage or just kind of move around a little bit when they walk and want a little bit of room to get through a gate. And we've invested a lot in making sure that that's the case, not just in the big picture in terms of the gates, but also in the little pictures in terms of how people use vending machines. Specifically, how people can not use vending machines and use a phone, especially if you're blind, visually impaired of some sort. There is no such thing as a good vending machine. But people are very used to their phones, and having a well-designed, accessible app where you can reload money is a much better interface than using a phone, which is what we learned from doing user testing a year and a half ago now with a group of users. Upgrading the assets, you all take the system, you understand what the fare collection system out there looks like. You've seen the duct tape on everything, you've seen the lack of preventative maintenance, you've seen the open gates, you've seen the fare vending machines that don't give change or accept money or give cards or do a whole lot of things. So upgrading these assets, which by the time they're upgraded will be, about 14 years old, which is give or take what the life should be of these assets. Revenue control, one thing that you might not know internally is that the system, the Charlie card system, has never had actual revenue reconciliation, which is not a very good thing if the thing that you're trying to do is to collect money through the system. It's just a core thing that doesn't work.
Sorry, what
yeah.
does that mean?
Revenue reconciliation?
Yeah,
if I
that
get
they've never had.
$1,000 into a cash box, the receipt that I have when I go to deposit that will not actually reconcile down to the penny. So it may say that I've got $970 in it. It may say that I've got $1,000 and $1,030 in it. It's just not, which that's kind of the core function.
Yeah, all right.
On that note, there was an email that went out to the group a while ago with a state auditor's report on AFC 1.0 that has all sorts of fascinating details that I've been meaning to read. But if you're interested in that,
I've read it. I have definitely read it. It is
for the group. I mean. I'm sure you've read
yes,
it.
it is very. If you want to know what the scary stuff is about what we're trying to replace, that's one of them, and that's part of the lesson from what we had, which is we went the first time around with a hardware company that had really never built this software before. And we asked them to essentially build software for us for the first time, and we got what we deserved out of that. And then the last piece of this, and this is the piece, I'm excited about all of this. I'm really excited about this last piece, which is fare collection system is at the core of what we can do at the T going forward, not just reconciling bad things and improving the customer experience just a little bit today, but also where we want to be. So that is being able to advocate and implement any kind of fare policy we want, whether it's distance-based fares, whether it's fares that are lower for local routes rather than routes that go into the city, off-peak, or fare capping, or fares that go between agencies, and not just the regional transportation authorities, but also fares that go across the transit management associations, and if we sign them up, the private shuttles that are all over the seaport and Kendall Square and the rest of the area. So how do we begin to expand what we're doing and not just think about the T as providing one set of services, especially bus services, but as becoming more into the mobility management sphere? So we're really excited about that. All right, so what are the components of the new system? Before I even go into that, and you guys aren't shy, so I'm not actually I will stop doing that. I'm not gonna pause between each slide. I'm going to assume that you will interrupt me when it's time for you to say something. So what are we doing? First is new hardware. And the hardware is what's gonna take us a while to implement. This is a long piece. So every single vehicle, every bus, and every Green Line vehicle is going to get new readers. That means that at every door where you can fit two people through, there will be a reader on either side of the door. So
Can you say what you mean by that you can fit two people through?
think about the high-level Green Line front, where you can really only get one human being, if that, through the door. We won't have anything. We won't have two readers on that because there's no way. That's actually the one exception. At every other door, there will be two readers. No, there's one more exception. what are they? The trackless trolley routes that have that extra third door on the other side will only have one reader on that extra third door. But everything else has two doors. Every Green Line vehicle, every bus has two readers at every door. They also don't have a fare box specifically. There's no way to use cash on board. And I'll talk more about how that's going to work. The other huge change is to commuter rail. So for commuter rail right now, essentially you can pay on board, right? That's no longer the case. When you ride commuter rail, once you're on the vehicle, just like when you're on a bus or a Green Line vehicle or a subway or ferry, you will be in a fare paid zone, which means that you have to pay your fare before you get on. And how you'll do that is that there will be stanchions throughout each station where you have to tap before you get on board, and you tap when you get off. When the conductors come through, you'll be tapping against their inspection device, which will come up green or red that says whether or not you've paid. But if you're on board and you haven't paid your fare, just like if you're on bus and you haven't paid your fare, that will be against our fare policy.
So there'll be readers at every station, including like Silver Hill?
So there are like 2 stations or 3 stations that have fewer than 10 passengers per day, where the conductor will be able to use their inspection device as a reader. Basically, if the station doesn't have electricity, we're not going to put a reader there. I think that's our basic rule. But there's like 3 to 5 of those. I don't know the exact number.
Like 3.
Yes, exactly. But other than that, yes, every station will have multiple, depending on the platforms, will have multiple readers. So the requirement is that they have to be, if it's an open platform, right, where you can just get off, they essentially have to be every 2 cars, so you never have to walk more than the length of a car to get to them. If there are entrances and egresses that are smaller, then they have to be at the entrances and egresses. So you don't have to divert yourself. You had a question.
Oh, yeah, how does that work so the commuter rail which is zone-based? So
Yep.
tapping on and then check-in, how will that work?
Yep, so you'll tap on. If you don't tap off, you will get charged the maximum fare. So if you get on in Worcester and you don't tap off, well, fine, you're going to get charged the maximum fare anyway. That's not a hard thing. If I get on at North Station, I'm going to tap off. I'm going to tap off on my journey, because if I don't, I'm going to get my Zone 10 fare.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when the conductor does a tap check, it's just essentially like, yeah, I tapped in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and it'll show you if they've paid what they're paid for. So if it's like a Zone 6 ticket or something like that they're tapping, or just literally dollars that they're tapping.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay.
Yep. New fare vending machines in every station, and I'll talk later about how we do the transition. New subway gates, so a complete and total replacement of all of those gates. And the preview is, rather than the gates going like this, the gates go like this, like in London and Chicago, and that's how you save a lot of room in the same amount of space. It's a more intelligent design.
Sorry, I have one more question about that.
Yeah.
So I have a 1A pass that lets me take the commuter rail from the city, but I also take the train to other zones pretty often. So under this, is there a way to have a monthly pass and cash on the same card?
So it's on the same. Let's talk about that for a second, because it's on the same credential. So right now we've got a card-based system, right? And so anything that you tap, the value is stored on that. So you've got different purses here. Mm-hmm. What we're moving towards is an account-based system, right? Which means that the card or your phone or your contactless credit card is a credential for the products that you've purchased.
Okay.
Which means that yes, and easily.
So there can be multiple products.
You can have multiple products because they're associated with your account. They're not associated with a card. So it's not like a technical bits and bytes challenge. It's just a credential that you've got.
Okay, cool. So it's not like the fare is not actually on that.
Correct.
Great.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Stored value on commuter rail. I come in with $20 on my card. I tap in at North Station.
Yeah.
When the conductor reads my card somewhere along the way, I haven't bought the ticket. Is it just a yes/no that I did tap on, or?
No, it'll say that you've got enough money to ride to X.
To wherever
Yeah.
I wouldn't have established what my destination is.
Yeah.
It'll just say you've got enough money to go all the way to the end?
Yeah, I mean, we have to figure out the exact interfaces and how this works, but basically, yes. It will give the conductor enough information to be able to make the right decision on whether or not you have valid fare. So in your case, if you have $20, well, yeah, you got valid fare for everything. If you tap on and you've got $2 on the card, you don't. If I'm past Zone 1A.
Is there an expectation that the Keola staff that are currently checking fares at the big 3 stations will continue on, and then if there's not enough money on that person's account,
there's a whole, I mean, this is going to be, we're a couple years away, there's going to be a whole lot of initiatives going back and forth on the extent to which those are going to be replaced with gates at those stations, which is a Keola's initiative. It's a lot of speculation to understand what that's going to be like 2 years from now.
Fair enough.
So in addition to the fare vending machines in stations, there'll be a significant number of fare vending machines on the street, which is one of the measures that we're doing to make sure that by removing cash from on board, we're not disadvantaging people who use cash, as well as our handheld inspection devices. So that's the hardware. As I mentioned, on the back office, it's an account-based system which does all the fare collection and payments processing. There's a really significant set of APIs built into that, which basically means that at any point, there's some that are sort of internal facing, which means that we could replace out hardware in the system, or that if we partner with somebody, they don't have to use our hardware to integrate with the system, they can use their hardware and the APIs. But it also means that there are APIs that work so that, for example, you can begin to think about integrating an Uber or a Lyft or any sort of app-based system without physical hardware into that, so that they can say, for example, imagine a future MBTA where we say, rather than late night service, which is unsuccessful and not large enough to meet the demand, but also incredibly inefficient, we say we're willing to offer anyone up to $10 between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. to take an Uber or Lyft as long as it's pooled and is within a quarter mile of the train of a fixed route station, right? Something like that. You can imagine a set of rules, and with the APIs, when Uber or Lyft comes in, validates, makes sure that it's our customer, uses the card which the person's been able to load with cash, we are able to subsidize that trip directly, knowing that that ride has actually taken place for less money than we're currently going to pay for extending late night service for better service for our customers, right? I'm not saying any of those things are going to happen, but with the APIs, we can begin to dream about what those things can look like and how we can begin to transform service that's both customer friendly, can reach all of our customers, including our cash customers, but also saves us money. New cards, there will be a new fare card. It will be better, unlike the current Charlie card, which has been hacked for quite some time, and we have protected ourselves and we're not losing money or anything like that, but it scares the living Jesus out of me every day. There will be a more secure fare card, fare protection, as well as mobile devices, contactless credit cards when they come. Gigantic set of new retail locations. So our retail location program right now, and by the way, if I was saying this like 13 years ago, pitching the Charlie card, somebody in my position probably said this exact same thing. The difference between me and them is that my contract mandates and requires it, and if it doesn't happen, my contractor will not get paid. As opposed to what happened last time, where the MBTA took all of the responsibility upon itself to do the recruiting and retention and had a big old piece of hardware, and by the way, paid the retailers 1% commission, so no retailers were interested in it, because if someone comes into your shop to load $5 of value and you make 5 cents off of that, that's not good foot traffic, that's bad foot traffic, right? So we've got a contractor, a vendor who's on the hook for this.
But
yeah.
that SI hasn't been determined yet, right?
Oh, no, it has.
Oh,
Yeah,
it has,
yeah.
okay.
We were selected back in November, and the commercial close was reached in March. We worked with them.
I thought that was okay, but then when I was reading the deck, I thought
Yeah.
that the SI had been.
No, the SI's been selected.
All right.
Yeah, so that's just a slide from when we were doing the selection.
All right.
But
Yeah,
yes, the SI's been selection.
I don't know. So the SI has deep pockets. The reason I say
Yeah.
this is because to a certain extent, you can see
Yeah.
you're not going to pay
Yeah.
the person, but if in the process of not doing that, you cripple them,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it's essentially it's the Keolis deal.
Yeah.
You end up paying them.
Absolutely. So this is different. Yeah. So there's two. I mean, yes, we've analyzed the financial stakes at play. You have to remember the difference here is that this is public-private partnership nature. Means that we have private infrastructure fund who has put their own money into it, right? And so that's the money there that's going to protect us. So if our Cubic, as the main technical party, can't do the work, the first recourse is for the private infrastructure fund to replace Cubic, rather than the MBTA, which is the problem with Keolis. As long as it's us versus that company, we're never going to do it, right? Because we're kind of stuck.
Right.
But we have a second party on our side in those instances.
Right. Cool.
It
Thanks.
doesn't solve everything, but
Yeah.
it helps us. It helps on our side.
Cool. Thanks.
Transition is a big. So the next transition is a big piece of everything that we're doing. The transition, especially both with the fair media, but also the gates, is complex, as you can imagine. The biggest complexity has to do with the gates themselves. We've got these old gates. We don't want a system where, come when we start transitioning around, we'll start pilots in late 2019, and we'll start the actual transition in May of 2020 is currently scheduled. We don't want a system where in May of 2020 you can get in at State Street, but you can't get out at, Bowdoin. I don't know why you take that trip. That were just the two things that came in my head. But you know what I mean? Where one media where your old Charlie card works in one thing and your new Charlie card works in another. That can't be. That's not customer friendly. That can't be a solution. So what we've done is it'll essentially go in two phases. So in the old current gates, as pictured on the bottom left here, we will essentially be, and that's not what it'll actually look like, we'll be installing one of the new readers in each and every one of the old gates, starting in give or take about a year and a couple months. Those will all be turned on at once. So all of our old gates will accept both the old tickets and cards as well as the new card. After 3 months, we'll turn off the old tickets and cards, and those only the new card will be accepted throughout the system. Meanwhile, while we're doing that, we have to do a little dance where we have the appropriate number of fare vending machines for both things, where we have the appropriate number of people and machines that can convert. If you've got $20 left on your current Charlie card and you want it on your new Charlie card, that can take one and move it to the other, and we have to do that dance during it. But at the gates themselves and for using the system, once you've converted to 2.0, you won't have to think about, does it work here? And if you're still using 1.0, you don't have to think, well, if I go to State Street, it'll work, but if I go over to, Forest Hills, it won't. And then after we turn off the old system, what we'll do is we'll go through and station by station, replace the gates and do the physical work, right? And that can take place in, about a week per station. Which won't close the stations down, but will be actual work. But what it means is that we don't have to do a flash cut. We don't have to go crazy. We also don't have to ever have a world in which, no matter what media you have, you can't use the system. So it doesn't sound like it's all that complex and crazy, but for us, this was a huge piece of everything that we wanted to get to, because the new introduction of a system is what's going to make it acceptable to people. People's first impressions are going to be there, and they're going to be locked in. And so we wanted to make sure that the first impression wasn't, that new fare collection system, God, I can only use it at this one location, it's horrible. On the right are a picture. They've been slightly updated since the proposal, but the proposal picture of the new gates there. As you can see, they're much more slimline. Basically, from not doing this to doing this, it means that the console itself is much smaller. Because the console itself is much smaller, the gates themselves can be wider. It's not particularly complex in there, and that's a good thing.
I've always thought that one of the reasons why there was such, well, take a step back. I remember when the current AFC gates were deployed, they were much more aggressive at closing.
Yes.
And there were a lot of people getting squished,
yes.
to put it bluntly. And then it was backed off, and then that allowed for a lot more people evading fare than was desired. It looks to me, just by visual inspection of this picture, it looks like the sweeping, closed coming together is going to be sort of the sweet spot between the two. Is that the intention?
No, it was really about space. We didn't require one or the other. Although what we asked is that they make everything more accessible, and this is where we ended up. We think it's a better solution. I don't know, quite frankly, what it's going to do to fare evasion one way or the other. As frustrating as it is to have people come in behind you or tailgate or do all of those things when you're paying your fare, I have to say that from all of the studies that our Office of Performance, that OPMI has done, subway fare evasion is exceedingly low. It's really not a big thing. It's not something that we need to spend a whole lot of our time on. It's significantly under 2%. It's not, it's just, and if you, like me, have the security cameras where you watch, which are focused on all of the gates, and you can watch people, and you can see the frustrating thing of gates being broken open, I watch it, and I see people see a gate open, and they literally go to the gate next to it that's closed, and they pay. Our customers are, for the most part, angels and are doing their best to pay. And as long as we can make it easy for them to pay, that's the right way to go about it. It's going to be a hard fight for us as we get to the inspection stuff, because once you go to all-door boarding, you have to do inspection. There's going to be a lot of fight in this. It's not necessarily the opinion that's shared throughout the MBTA right now. I think we're getting closer to it, but let's not fight the silly fights. And by the way, there are also the customers who, no matter what we do, they're going to figure out how to evade the fare.
I have a question. I'm on the buses all the time, and not a lot, but people give the bus driver a sob story, and usually they, unless it's the same person doing it over and over again. Are those same con artists going to be able to get on the bus? So that's not going to change.
Nope. And you know what, they do already.
I'm
big deal. I mean, there's a certain set of people, and maybe it's because they have a real reason and they're too poor to pay for the bus or whatever. Like, that's such a small portion of the population. Why are we spending our effort on that rather than making sure that the people who can pay their fare actually do, and making it easy for people to pay their fare?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Go ahead.
On that note, on the bus, I also take the bus. I also see bus drivers being someone's like fumbling with their change. Bus drivers being like, just get on and stop wasting my time.
Well, that's because
so that's not going to happen anymore because no cash on board.
Yeah, that goes away.
So,
but then there is going to be the proof of payments, policy mechanism, and along those lines, I'll say that I think we really need to do some outreach to the community and develop a real rigorous policy on how that's going to be done in order to make sure that it's done in a way that's not targeting certain communities. It just needs to be out there.
So I've been waiting for somebody to bring that up because I neglected to introduce Anthony Thomas, who's sitting over there at the beginning of the meeting. Anthony was hired 2 months ago now?
I think so.
Yep. As our first outreach coordinator on AFC2. Do you want to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you've been doing?
Sure. Yes, I joined in May. My name is Anthony Thomas, and I'm here to kind of conduct all of the community outreach for AFC2. So that involves kind of going to the communities, talking to people, letting them know kind of in the early days, like, what does the project look like? What is AFC2? What are some of the details that David's talking to you guys about? But then kind of really talking to them about all of these policy decisions that we need to make, and David will talk about this later in the presentation, but really getting their input on all of these different policies, and then using their input to help really craft the decisions, because very few of the policy decisions have actually already been made, and so really kind of using the community's feedback to kind of help make those decisions. And then in a couple years from now, the role will kind of change into like okay, rollout's coming, like, how do we get prepared to make sure that everyone's ready to roll out?
Well, question kind of on the rollout thing. I mean, so to what extent will we not be able to go back once we go cashless on the buses? And I say that because if there is any way to go back, you're gonna go back.
Yeah. So we're removing fare boxes and getting rid of them.
Okay, all right, just making sure because there's just first off, I think you've been around Boston long enough to know that no matter how you design the system, it's gonna be there's gonna be outcry, and it's gonna be perceived as negative by the squeakiest wheels out there.
Yep.
And they have enormous influence, so that's gonna happen, and anything that can be used as a hook, to reverse the system will be done, and they'll get the legislature to back them up on it. So you're not gonna only have to be able to withstand the outcry from the public, but you have to be able to withstand, the pressure from the legislature on the governor, whoever that is, and the Secretary of Transportation, and the only way you're not going to go back is if you can't go back.
Yep, those fare boxes are getting removed.
Okay,
and disposed of.
All right.
Ceremonially destroyed.
And you can't put other ones in their place.
Well, I mean, you can always do that. But
Okay,
who's going to pay money? Who's,
it's prohibitively expensive to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
No, it's a great point.
Can I go back to the gates briefly?
Yeah.
My biggest concern, and maybe not all of these things, but my biggest concern is just throughput in stations, making sure people are going in and out. So the first question is, you're saying the standard size is 7 inches wider and the accessible gate is 5 inches wider. Are you getting that extra width just based on that the consoles in between are smaller?
Correct.
Okay, so it's not like we're going to reduce the. Because if you went with 4 larger gates, and all of a sudden a station that had 4 gates goes down to 3 gates, was my concern. We're not going in that direction. Okay, so you thought of that one. And then we're going essentially from a closed like this to a swinging door. My only concern on that piece is during rush hour.
I can reassure you. Chicago, London, use these gates. They have higher throughput than this.
Okay. The only reason I was going through it's not like people are going in one set of gates and going out the other set of gates.
But we can set.
People in out.
We can set
don't have to go.
We can set that for this though. So that's a policy. I mean, it's not necessarily going to change any of that, but we can say that at, for example, South Station, you could go in through one set of arrays and have to exit through a second set of arrays. Or set gates in that way in order to speed up movement in that way. So the ones that are nearest to the stairs are for people coming in, and the ones that are furthest away are for people going out, and that could change on time of day. That's the kind of configuration possibility that we have if that's something that we deem to be useful.
Gotcha.
And that's pretty standard in other systems. It's one of the things that Boston doesn't do, but pretty much every other, if you go down to DC, they do it. If you're in London, they do it, in Singapore and Hong Kong, and,
you get a little green dot on the stations that are open.
The green or the red,
And the red on the other ones.
Exactly. That's pretty standard,
I think I heard or read somewhere that the mag stripe mechanism, the majority of the upkeep, the operational cost.
No, it's not so much a majority of the operational cost. It is a majority of the things that break. There's a lot of other operational costs, but it breaks constantly.
I meant in terms of like that hardware itself. Is it going to be a bottle wash between the door operational cost and for the old versus new? I mean, the sliding versus the swinging, is it going to be about the same?
Overall, the operational cost for the system will be about the same as the old system. Give or take. This isn't being done as a money saving, we're going to do any of that. That's never been the intent here. This is better customer experience, allow us to focus on the real problems that the MBTA has, not on how do we collect fares and harass our customers.
So what's the mechanism, of the door opening? Is it like when you tap out, it opens against you?
So one of the things about these gates, so if you look at our current gate, that's something that before I was involved in this, I didn't even really know. The exit side, the paid side of the gate, as opposed to the unpaid side of the gate, is slightly shorter. in our current gates and has a different set of sensors. So even if you were to put a reader on our current gates right now, you could never do anything with exit or distance or anything like that. There simply aren't enough sensors. There isn't enough length to be able to sense a human being and to open the gates properly, which you've probably noticed when you're exiting, waiting for that gate to open. You have to get much closer than you do when you are entering, and it's sort of uncomfortable. You're sort of there, and you kind of feel like you're waiting, especially with the high gates, for that thing to open.
You stick something out, your lunch goes.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah, well, you have to do it. You learn it. You have to learn it in the right position, though, right? Because the sensors are. Yeah. So with the new gates, they're obviously longer, so they've got the sensing pieces in there. There's a lot of fun sensing stuff that we did here. There's requirements about what size dog they have to be able to sense for somebody who's visually impaired and has it. Like, there's all sorts of complex things that get involved. But anyway, there's an exit reader on all of them. Whether that exit reader is operational at the outset has everything to do with the policy decisions that we want to make. There's a couple of different worlds we could envision. One is it's not operational at all, so it just works the same way it does right now. You walk up to the gate and it opens on your way out. The second set is it's operational, but you need to tap even though you don't get any reward for tapping on your way out, which just allows us to collect data. Doesn't sound like that would be very popular. I mean, I'd love to see the data, so I'm all for it. Yeah, or we have fare policy that encourages you to tap out, either by having distance-based fares or by giving you a 5-cent discount if you tap out, or something of that. So there's a whole set of policies that we could have. But basically, the answer is maybe.
A smaller. Just one more personal question. What is the soundscape of the new machines?
Yeah, it's not amazing. It's pretty standard. I had a dream. God, this was 2 years ago when we were first writing the RFP. We were working with a couple folks from Berkeley, and we were talking about, can we put into the RFP itself a requirement to have different varieties of sounds so that things can work in conjunction. We could even do interesting things, rewards, special things for like your 100th journey, or like all sorts. But like there would be also, that didn't make it. We ended up with needing sort of standard off-the-shelf equipment. No manufacturers do that. We weren't going to pay someone to do the software for all of that and risk the delivery of the project on that. And so basically, I think we're in design review to select the actual beep and the boop, but it's not amazing.
I just personally do not like the sound of the accessible gates right now when you tap in. They're so loud.
Yeah. They do have to be set slightly louder though, which is the problem.
They have to be abrasive.
Hmm?
They don't have to be abrasive, I don't think.
Yeah. We will be reviewing it, but yeah, it basically can play a wave file. It's not amazing. And there were all sorts of cool ideas. Chiming bells at the aquarium. You could have different kinds of animal sounds. At State Street, you could have it be very sort of John Hancock, old timey. Like there are all sorts of things that you could do that would be really interesting.
I like it. I don't know. Maybe those are on apps where you log certain things and you get a certain number and you get a badge of some kind.
We love
when you hit every stop on the orange line, you get the orange line badge. When you hit every stop on the red line, you get the red line badge.
We went down such a deep rabbit hole on trying to figure out if we could do this, and it was actually in the original RFP, and we had to strip it out because everyone was like, we can do that for you, but you should add a couple months to your schedule and like X millions dollars, and that it didn't stay in for very long.
Yeah, you'd be on the news with that one when you Costco.
Yeah, I know. But it would have been cool, right?
And you need the Boston.
Get some like restaurant for it.
I'm surprised because you're always like against like the gold-plated stations, and now you want like these nice housekeepers. It's like for you, it's like spending extra money on anything that's nice, and you scream about it. I'm just surprised. It's a pleasant thing.
There's a difference between putting a $140 million head house on top of the same circular that is government station that makes the same squeal when you go through it, versus spending $2 million, a fraction of that,
On a thing that you go through twice a day, or 4 times a day, every day.
The entire system, everybody, it's a...
I agree. I think that there's something to good design, and I wish we could have kept it in, but it got value engineered out.
What if you ride the RTAs, say PVTA or BAT?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay? I said I'll get to that in a little bit. Wait on that one, because we've got a whole thing, so I can explain it. Because I want to go through the equipment first, so you get a sense, because I think that'll give you some more context. So
do the gates, do they only flip open in one direction?
No, they go both ways.
So if it's an exit,
Yeah.
they can flip that way?
And the office building does that.
Yeah, it doesn't come at you. Basically, it doesn't come at you.
So whatever you're exiting.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was my point around that people who used to see a gate though.
Yeah.
Is that you could have it coming, if somebody is coming in and I'm coming out and I'm trying to sneak out, I'm not gonna wait for this.
We've spent a lot of time with those. We've got a whole technical team dealing with all of that.
And you're telling me, it's never been so easy.
This is a look at what the readers are going to look like everywhere. I should have brought one down. They're not huge. They are half the area, so about this size of the sheet of paper. They're about that thick. They get mounted on the poles. They're sort of all screen that can display whether it's valid or not, and to tap here, what you see there is not the image that it will be. They'll be at all doors. It's the same thing is mounted in the gate. The same thing is mounted on the stanchions on the commuter rail platforms. So wherever you tap, it all looks the same, and it's got this display which allows us to be more responsive with messages all in the place that you've tapped. So like unlike now where you tap, you're looking in a separate place where you tapped for a card, which is a little LED screen. This gives us a lot more opportunity. The tap area itself is much larger, which makes a difference, especially as you're trying to speed up boarding and speed up people going in and out of gates. As I said, the fare boxes will be removed after the 1.0 is shut off, and we think it's going to speed up buses.
Will the screens be all symbolic, or will there be language? And if there will be language, will it be multilingual?
Yeah. So there are sometimes additional pieces of language to help out, but the language is not needed. One of the features that we are working with them on, and I can't recall whether it goes onto these screens or just the fare vending machines, is the ability for people when they select their language to have that reflected across their account. Remember the difference between it being a card-based and account-based thing. So if you have selected Spanish and you've loaded something in a fare vending machine, the next time that you log into the website, we should know you want to see it in Spanish. When you go back to the fare vending machine and you tap your card, we should know that's your card, you've selected Spanish, from now on you're going to see this in Spanish. It just makes sense. The fare vending machines have to be multilingual. I can't remember the number of languages. Can you, Anthony, at this point, or Dave, can you remember? Yeah. A lot. The website has to have a lot. They have to have, we do machine Google translation for some of them, but the subset that has to have actual human translation, so it isn't just the Google Translate version of the website. So we've done a lot with language to make sure that the signage has to be there. In a largely Vietnamese community, there has to be Vietnamese signage that et cetera, so that it's actually reflective of the riders and makes sense. So that's big, but I can't remember if that shows up or not on the text here. Next page just has, I sort of talked through all of this piece, so I don't have to go through it too much, but this shows the preliminary design for what the stanchions look like on commuter rail. So it's the same reader, just in a much larger housing that's slightly protected from the weather. The enforcement app are is handheld devices for proof of payment. I think we mostly talked this through. I just wanted to give you a sense of the equipment. Next page is you'll see a couple things on the fare vending machines. Again, these are still undergoing final design, but so it won't necessarily, like the design of the outside won't look like that, but that's sort of the physical layout of the machine. It's a machine that's pretty standard. If you've been in Chicago, you would have used this machine. If you've been in other locations, you would have used this machine. The second location that goes at bus stops is different. It's a Parkeon, now called Flowbird Strata machine. That machine you'll recognize from the multi-space parking meters all throughout Boston and similar to also other local municipalities. The multi-space parking meters in Boston do not accept cash. Every single one of our fare vending machines accepts cash. There is not a single fare vending machine that we will put out that will be a credit card only vending machine. They all accept cash, straightforward. These machines are great because they're significantly smaller. They also run on solar power, which means that if you can actually put them at a bus stop without wiring them. They're tested in the weather. They've been there forever, so they're really great machines. They'll issue slightly different fare media. It's the same thing. It's got the NFC chip in it. You'll still tap it. The cards that you're used to in the Charlie card are a relatively thick card, right? The small machines, really the big difference between the two, there's two differences. The small machines cannot issue the thick cards. They issue a thinner plastic card that comes on a roll. The cards still last for more than a year. They're still durable. They just don't have the same amount of thickness to them. And that's only if you're getting it for the first time there, which we don't expect many people will be doing because there'll be an enablement fee to get the card, which we can talk about in a second too.
Can I ask
the other thing that they can't do is they don't dispense change.
Just wondering how prevalent are you imagining the bus stop?
The last estimate that I saw is that there's going to be about 450 of them.
Okay.
There is something, and if you are into reading the RFP, I highly recommend it. I love this RFP. It's only about 1,100 pages. There's one particular section called the quantity standards, and this is what applies here. So whether you're using a retail location, a limited fare vending machine at a bus stop, or a fare vending machine on the street, doesn't really matter to us. What matters to us is a set of standards that we put forth that our system integrator needs to comply with, not just at the outset, but through the term of the contract. And there's many more than this, but the two basic ones that hold are that 95% of all journeys at one end or the other need to be within 1,000 feet of a location that can accept cash. 98% need to be within 2,000 feet of a location that can accept cash. Now that can be a fare vending machine, that can be a smaller on-street fare vending machine, that can be a retail location that complies with the hours and the accessibility requirements. But that's what they have to do. How they want to combine those, we don't really care about. It just has to be on one end or the other. You can accept cash here. It's combined with a set of fare policies, which we'll talk a whole lot more about, but the most important one of that is the ability, and this is where the enablement fee comes in. Because we're going to charge an enablement fee, which the board's talked about, and we've talked about in public of $5, what that means is that we can allow people to go negative, because you've paid the $5 already so that we know you're good for it. So you can go one fare negative. So let's say you try and get on the bus and you've got 10 cents on your card and you tap, and then someone comes through and inspects it. You have a valid fare because you can go one fare negative. Because we know that you're not going to throw that card away, because if you did, it would cost you $5. So you're going to keep that card. And by the way, at the same time, we'll stop giving away cards because we've distributed some untold number of cards. I mean, as of 2 years ago, it was 17 million cards. And that's real money. And so by charging money, we can stop giving money away and we can make sure that we can enable good fare policy, which means that combined with these locations, you're never far from a location if you're a cash user where you can load with cash. There's a whole lot of other standards that go along with this. If it's bus rapid transit, there needs to be something at every station. If it's Green Line, it has to be there. It has to be at the top 50% of the commuter rail. It has to be at the top bus stop on every line by volume. It has to be at any intermodal station and where you can transfer from bus to Green Line. You can't be required to change at large stations like at Forest Hills or Harvard or Central. For Central, for example, because I know that very well, Central Square, the fare vending machines on the bottom, that are already there are not sufficient to meet the quantity standards. They actually have to put either a retail location or an on-street machine to service the one bus and the CT1 and the 47 and all the other buses that go through there, so that someone doesn't have to change levels to reload their fare. So there's a whole set of requirements here that we put forth, not to prescribe exactly where these locations are, but to prescribe the standards that have to be met for these locations now and going forward, which also means that if we reroute our buses and we change the way those are routed, you still have to meet the 95% and 98% standards for this. And so we were thinking about that here so that we're not set in a place 5 years from now when we've gone through the Better Bus project and we've done all of that, we've finally implemented higher frequency routes on our best routes, and now all of a sudden we've got fare vending machines on street all in the wrong place, right? Yeah.
How is the vendor compensated for that, or how do they address the risk, or do they just take on that risk?
They take on that risk. We've paid them. They've essentially already priced that in. Yeah. The retail locations we think are going to be really good. I don't think I've got the slide in here, but the retail locations are cool because there's 3 different ways that retail locations work. There's like a big box retailer who's probably going to be the sort of backbone, so I think a CVS or a Walgreens or a Rite Aid, and that'll integrate into their cash register, into their point of sales terminal, which means that it's not like a separate piece of box or separate piece of kit like it is right now that has to go on, which is why we can't get a Walgreens or anyone to do that, because they're not going to have a big old box that requires a ISDN line to connect, on where they are. So there's that. The second piece is, if you're familiar with Clover from First Data, those are the sort of white cash registers that you see at a lot of coffee shops that you can kind of flip over, flip back, and some of those other things. They've made a really big play in there. Those will be able to be enabled so that you can reload at those locations without having to distribute new equipment or do any sort of point of sales integration or anything like that. And the third piece is literally a payment app that can work on an Android device, which means that your mom and pop local retailer or your bodega who's just using literally a cash register that's not even connected to anything at all, on their phone can actually reload people's cards, taking in cash directly. So we've tried to hit the various different kinds of locations that we're going to be able to need, and then the SI is responsible for meeting all of where those points of sale places need to exist. And of course, the main thing is we're doing all of this because we're spending a lot of time on people who currently use cash. It's a very small percentage. 7% of our bus and Green Line riders, obviously 0% of our subway riders, but 7% of our bus and Green Line riders right now. 3.5% of them use cash directly, 3.5% of them, give or take, and these are not exact, load cash on board the vehicle. So we're spending a lot of time on that. We expect that many, many fewer people will be using a card at all. We expect that many fewer people will be using any of these things because your phone is a whole lot easier. And your phone, you'll be able to, whether through Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or Google Pay or through an app that we put out there, directly be able to pay by tapping at any of the places that you pay by tapping a card or pay by tapping your contactless credit card. So we think that, and contactless credit cards, from every word that I've gotten, although we're not dependent on it, will be issued, which means that unlike the insert and wait 2.5 hours until the thing finishes working, you've got dual mode cards, which if you've been to the UK in the last 5 years, you'll see that everyone is essentially issuing, they were issued after these contactless payment systems, specifically the payment system from TfL was put in place, which means that people tap. It's taken over about 35% of their payments. In the last couple of years, it grows and is continuing to grow. So there's going to be a whole lot less need to interact with any of these fare vending machines or retail locations.
They get annoyed at you when you hand them the money, you have to insert the card.
Yes, yes.
Over now.
So now it's just, the contactless card with the tap, all of the standard stuff that you expect that you can do in a mobile application, being able to reload your card and having it work right away, either with a credit card. By the way, your phone you can use as a card, the equivalent of your card at a fare vending machine. So rather than having a card, if you have a phone but you choose to use cash, or you're unbanked and you don't have credit or debit, but you do have a phone, because almost all of our population, regardless of whether or not they have credit, has a phone. You can tap your phone as if it were a card and load it with cash at a retail location or a fare vending machine. The card will have auto reload, will have all of the things that you just sort of expect in a day-to-day service. I don't talk about these all too much, but they're pretty standard. And obviously the machines all issue cards as well, rather than going to the place where we have people who issue cards. I mean, all the standard stuff that sucks right now doesn't exist anymore.
We're getting close to the end, so maybe 10-minute warning?
Yeah.
Okay.
As I said, I could talk about this forever.
No, this is great.
Yeah.
It was great.
I know it's a little bit out of bounds, but what you do with the phone, have you thought about maybe helping with wayfinding, along with the fare collection stuff? Because people look at their phones all the time now, anyways.
Yeah.
So you could combine that with this is how you get to the ticket, the gate, and then how you get out. Maybe a little AR or something in there.
Yeah.
It's not specifically for you.
So to be perfectly frank, I'm always skeptical about doing that combined with this stuff. And one of the big reasons that I am, and one of the reasons that we've chosen the strategy that we have in terms of endorsing transit rather than having our own app, is because I have a hard time believing that we are ever going to stay on the cutting edge and have the budget to do all of that. And I'd much rather us not do that and abandon a project with customers and focus our efforts on the back office stuff that we do really well. The APIs that we have here, yes, we'll have our own app because it's sort of David Gore and we have to, but the APIs are such that if a city mapper or a Move It or a Transit or any developer wants to get into the payment business and integrate payments into their AR app that does that, they'll be able to do it. And I think that that's a better solution for us than us building it.
Yeah, but you plug into it. That's
Yeah.
really what I'm getting at. Because wayfinding is a big deal, especially when people get off. It's like where do you go next and what you can find on the city one.
Yeah.
Two things. So the $5 enablement fee, that's regardless of whether you're getting a card or using your own device. Is that right?
No, if you use your own device with a
charged
credit card, but you also don't get that. You don't get that one more ride because you're using a credit card in that way. So if you have a card, if you pay the $5 enablement fee, you get the one more ride. If you haven't, you don't get it. With one big exception, which is, and this is where the policy piece comes in, we're trying to figure out ways of, for those people who $5 is a lot of money, we don't currently charge anything. We don't want to get rid of the $5 fee, but for those people for whom it's not affordable, we want to make sure that they have access to a card that does give them the benefit of having that one extra ride, that ability to go negative once. And so the way that we're thinking about doing that is to work with local community groups, to work with local NGOs, to work with municipalities so that they can distribute it as they see fit, and that the MBTA isn't in charge of saying, you're worthy of getting a free card, you are not worthy of getting a free card.
And for potential policies like fare capping, would those be tied to a device that you used, or would you have to have an account and a
No. So, fare capping is tied to your account.
So So if you use a card, that's not an account. That's
yes, it is. Yeah, so when we say account-based, all that means is that the media that you use is a credential. Every tap is tied to an account. Whether that account is implicit and unregistered or explicit and registered is up to the person registering that card and using that card, but every tap is tied to an account.
So if you want any account benefits and more than one medium that you're using, you'd have to.
So there's actually an exception here. So at least at first, it will be essentially one media per account. If I want to switch between using my phone and my contactless credit card, I will have to shut off my phone as being on that account and put on my contactless credit card. And that's just for pass product purposes. I can't have a monthly pass that has two different kinds of credential, or else I'm going to have my contactless credit card, my wife's going to have my phone, and we're not going to think twice about it, and I'm not even going to think it's fraud. I'm just going to think it's part of the policy. So at some point we may be able to figure that out. We've talked internally about a reality detection machine, which essentially is such that if we see a tap that is, at State Street at 8:15, and then we see a tap that's at Woburn at 8:17, well, we're going to shut off that card and figure out how to charge them two fares. At some point down the line, once this thing's introduced and working wonderfully, we'll talk about that.
Go ahead. Two things. One, I travel to conferences a lot, and I'm a slow adopter. But I was in Sydney last September. They use your main vendor. It was incredibly simple. You just got a card at the airport, use bus, light rail, subway, ferry.
Don't think about it, right?
Which I appreciate. So the second question, or the second question is, in thinking about your customer base, to what extent are you using the experience of the other markets where the contractors you're working with have already developed a lot of experience? And to what extent are you doing some testing before full rollout with, the one thing that I worry about is, especially on the buses, the range of people's capacity to interact with the system varies a lot.
Yeah, we're going to have to spend a lot of time on that. There's no doubt about it. On the first part, our team was just out in Vancouver, which is one of the cities that Cubics worked on. Before we spent the time, not just unofficially, but officially in Chicago and London and other places. So yeah, we're very much dedicated to learning from the experience, both of the user base, but also of the agency side partner, about what can go right and what can go wrong in these contracts to make sure that we get it right as well, because they are big and they've done it everywhere, and we want to make sure that we take the good stuff and try and mitigate some of the bad stuff on both the user side and the agency side. What was the other part? Was the
Well, I might even suggest that you put a number of pretty savvy people on the buses or wherever this system is apt to not function as smoothly because of the sophistication of some of your customers.
There's going to have to be a lot of outreach and a lot of training. There's going to have to be a lot of time, particularly at senior centers, and those sorts of things. We've got a mobile model office, which is part of this, which means that it's basically fare gates and validators and stuff in a truck, which we can take around in the back of a truck, and we can ask people to come into the back of the truck and use a fare vending machine. But basically, we can take it to people so that we can show people how to use it. We're going to have to develop a whole thing around this, because I think that's going to be our biggest issue. Luckily, for seniors who already have a senior card, it's actually quite an easy transition, because we know where they live. But we have, unlike everyone else, they are registered and they have a card, and we've got a way of contacting them. So we can actually mail them, rather than asking people to go and re-register and to get a new card, we can mail people a new card. We can mail them material over time that begins to acclimate them to the system. So in some ways, some of the vulnerable populations we actually have a pretty good means of communicating with them already. It doesn't account for everybody at all. Immigrants, people who don't speak English, we're particularly concerned about making sure that we get this right.
When you prompted a question in my head, I'm assuming Sydney has old people.
No,
people
that's
who speak
kind of why.
other languages as well.
Right.
Is there anything unique to Boston that you've had to customize, whether it's because we have boats?
No, I mean the big difference is that we're removing.
No one else has boats, or
No, we do, but that's not so big. I mean, we're removing cash from on board. That's really the big thing. Almost everything else in this procurement, our goal from the beginning was to be second or third, not first. For all of these gates, for every piece of hardware, everything that we wanted was for it to be field proven, to show that it works and it exists somewhere else. For the software to be field proven. We don't want to innovate in that space, right? That is not the place to innovate. We want to innovate in making the system more equitable and access and all that stuff, but not in that.
And then the question I originally had before was, my colleagues correct me if I can drop it for the sake of time, but do we talk about the commuter rail and why is that going to be on the platform versus at the doors?
Why they're not going to be on the commuter rail?
Yeah.
The electricity and power and retrofitting those commuter rail vehicles to have all of that stuff on it would just be a project with our relationship with Keolis, with the age of those vehicles, with what's going on with all of that. That wouldn't make any sense. We evaluated it. It just didn't. It didn't make financial sense. It didn't make sense for the life of a contract. It just didn't work out. This is a much more proven way of doing it.
But you're talking about putting essentially poles all the way down a long platform. I mean, that's not a small infrastructure project.
It's less than it would be to put it on the vehicles.
Really?
Yes.
Right, but it's not one station per station. It's multiple.
But it's not one reader per car. It's like at least 4.
Probably a lot more than that, given how crowded and how quickly people get onto those vehicles. It'd be like putting readers at subway doors rather than at the gates. Yeah. You could do it, we could do it, but it would probably slow down entrance and exit.
That's the only, ironically, that's the area of the system I worry about fare evasion on.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
where the fare evasion exists. That's what our statistics show.
That's where fare evasion exists, and it's where the biggest, yeah.
So the way that this combats the fare evasion there.
No mine's paying $2.25 to get around town.
So the way that this combats the fare evasion there is that being on board is a fare paid zone. One, the inspection device actually follows, it's got GPS in it, so we know where our conductors are. One of the reasons that there's huge fare evasion isn't just because people who ride the commuter rail are scofflaws. It's because our conductors have become so attuned to it that they've stopped collecting fares, and that people either on purpose or just sort of by default begin to take advantage of that over time. But we also don't know when a conductor is going through the train how many of those people they check or they don't check. We only have them to report on it. With an inspection device, everyone who is in that train should have tapped on that. We know how many people tap on and tap off from that train. We know if a conductor has inspected everyone on that. And if a conductor does not inspect everyone on that, assuredly there will be discipline from the union that they're not doing their job. Right? So we have a way of checking that the conductor is actually inspecting.
So, getting really over time, I'm happy to have you speak the rest of the night, but I also don't want to take advantage of your good nature. Go right ahead.
At the risk of speaking for everybody here, and I might be, but I hope I'm not if it's not appropriate, but I think we're all eager and dying to help as much as we can. Keep us in mind as we go forward. How can we help? Please let us know how we can help. We want to help, we want to be involved, whatever we can do.
I mean, I think, Anthony is obviously, point on all of this. I don't know, you want to?
Yeah, so I have contact information. I'll definitely share that with you guys. Feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any questions or comments. And then we're currently working on kind of standing up our outreach program. But there will at minimum be some sort of quarterly update where we kind of let people know what decisions are still to be made, what decisions have been made, and kind of get people's input on that at a quarterly basis as kind of a bigger meeting to kind of help supplement the kind of smaller community-based outreach that we'll be doing as well.
I was just looking to see.
I guess what we're adding to that is if you need a focus group, where, outside of in a more casual manner, like if you wanted to compare tones and decide between tones on entry gates,
So let me, there's slide 10 on here, which just actually talks about the policy areas in particular, and maybe Anthony, you just want to mention them so that you guys get a sense of where a large portion of our talking to the community will be. I understand that you guys have a larger interest in this, but this is sort of a big part of the outreach here. And for us, one of the things that you can do, in addition to being personally involved in this, is getting groups to the table for this outreach and these meetings that don't typically show up. We want to make sure that we're not just talking to the people that we always talk to, that we're talking to everybody, and that everyone has a say and a voice, and that we're listening to what they have to say. So, you know, with people that you know in the community and everywhere, the more that you can help publicize and get people to these things, the better off we'll be. Exactly. But yeah, you want to talk about what they are?
Sure. So we're on slide 10. Policy area 1 is kind of data privacy. There will be a lot more data that's kind of that comes through this new system. And so we're kind of hoping to update our data privacy policy. It's been very many years since the last
decade.
And so kind of looking at revamping that to kind of be in this new in the new system. Access to fare cards and sales locations. So David talked about that a little bit. Making sure that everyone is able to have a fare card if they want one. That's kind of a gap in our current system, so kind of trying to help mitigate that. And then also establishing programs for giving card, making sure people have access to cards that don't have that $5 enablement fee. So working with community organizations to make sure that we're able to get them access to the cards. Fair inspections, proof of payment. How do we make sure that we do this in a way that's fair, that's equitable, that's just, and that's transparent? So we're hoping to establish a set of inspection principles that we widely get a solicit input on, and those are really it's going to be a significant project to establish that proof of payment system. But really, just how do we make sure that the principles of it are set so that people understand when they are interacting with the fare inspector what the process is, and that it's not an uncomfortable situation, that it's just like an understanding, just trying to make sure that you pay your fare. And then the fare structure and products is kind of the part that lots of people want to talk about at the forefront, but that's probably a little bit further along. What are some innovative ways that we can deal with fare structures? David mentioned, things like fare capping and things like distance-based pricing or time-of-day pricing. How would we institute such fare structures? And what are the implications of implementing those fare structures? And then what are some potential new products that we can implement? The new system, the technology allows us to be much more agile with kind of the development and deployment of these sorts of fare products. So kind of getting people's input on what sorts of things they'd like to see.
So I have one question. A number of us have worked in the past on trying to bring in the universities and to give basically all the students, maybe family members, whatever, kind of a Chicago-like system where they bring fewer cars to Boston, they're more a part of the T, they help with the time of day ridership balance. But it seems like with this about to roll out, now would not be the time to press them into the current system. I mean,
I think it would be fun.
You think it would be?
Okay. Yeah, I think there's no point in not pressuring universities. It takes so long to make decisions anyway that you got to stay at them.
We had a conversation with the guy in charge of the PASS program, and we talked about university passes that this month CIF subcommittee, so we'll be reporting out on that.
Okay.
Yeah, basically what we talked about, I think would still fit. I would still fit into this.
Okay.
Don't stop pressing.
I will not.
It's important. The one last thing, because I know that you have other business to go on to, didn't answer your question about the RTAs. Basically, the RTAs can either opt into this contract, they can have their own separate, which means that they would have the devices. They still have to keep their fare boxes. The RTAs are never going to eliminate cash. They've got a very different population than the MBTA. They operate in a very different physical environment. They're not in an urban environment. It's just a different place. They're always going to keep their fare boxes. To keep interoperable fares, they can opt into our system, which means that they can install this equipment. The equipment is phenomenally cheap compared to our fare boxes and what it costs right now. It costs, a relatively nice SUV for each one of those fare boxes on a bus. Not like luxury, but mid-level. You're not going to get a Benz, but you can probably get a pretty nice Honda or something domestic. The readers that you see are more like $1,500 to $2,000. So for the RTAs to opt into this will not be that expensive. They can opt in if that opt-in requires sort of them to pay our vendor Cubic to maintain the equipment for them. If they wanted to have a separate relationship with Cubic and also purchase a fare box that was part and parcel of that, they would have to have a separate agreement. Cubic is required to negotiate with them on a separate agreement. Or if they want to go totally their own way and just integrate their own fare box by API, they could do that as well. So there's sort of 3 different ways. Whichever way it works, as part of the system that we bought, even though we've got no use for it just as the MBTA, we've got an apportionment system built in. So we can have joint fares with that, and we can say if you're transferring from back to the MBTA, rather than paying one fare and then a second fare when you get on commuter rail, you are paying a combined fare, and we'll apportion it and give each party the right amount. Assuming that BAT and the MBTA can come to that agreement in order to do that. But so all of that functionality is built in. But on day one, the RTAs are not going to have anything. On day one, we're going to protect the MBTA, right? We want to make sure that the system works and works in its core functionality before we expand it to anything else. But once that happens, this can be our region-wide system if the RTAs and MassDOT want it to be. And we procured it like that from the get-go. It's not the most exciting way to end a conversation, but it's an important component.
This was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Subcommittee reports.
Thanks. So, Melissa, can I ask you to talk loud?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
Great.
So, I don't remember, but I have his card. Brendan Fogarty came to talk to CAF about the University Pass program, where it had sort of stalled out previously, and what he was thinking about for wanting universities and colleges to do. And I think so he told us about, so there's a semester pass right now where students can buy from their schools a pass at a discount, and they have to pay a bunch of money up front. Only about 5% of students use it. It's really not great. Universities are like, I don't want it. It's like, no, this is a waste of my time. So that's been one of the challenges. And there are a couple of models that he talked about. One is that if a school is willing to do 100% buy-in for their students, then the MBTA is willing to offer a 50% discount on a monthly pass if they buy them for all students. And they used MIT as an example. They have a special deal with MIT because MIT does 100% faculty subsidizing and 50% students subsidizing. So they have like a whole separate thing with them. But that's a lot of buy-in. I think it worked out to maybe like 800 per student or something like that. And the alternate model that he was talking about, which I think sounds really interesting, is schools pay for every student, but what they pay is like dependent on how many students use transit, and then students get a discounted fare on their card. So like a student would get like an 85-cent fare. What did he use as an example? So like something like Harvard, where there's not deep transit penetration because everybody stays around campus, it would probably be about $20 a head per student. But then everybody, like it's paid per use, so if the price goes up as more more students use transit, and it would be like higher at a place like BU where transit buy-in is higher. And it's cost neutral for the T, and like really flexible for schools, and really transparent pricing, so nobody will feel like they're getting ripped off. So those were the logistical things that he has on offer. And then one of the other things we talked about was, how do we start talking to schools to get them interested in this? One of the challenges is that there's not really like a transit person anywhere. There's like parking people, but turns out they don't like transit. There are like sustainability offices, but they don't have a lot of power. There's deans of students, but they're like whatever. So it's not really clear like who at each university would be the best person to talk to. But they're working with the student government at Northeastern to do just a little pilot program where they like give Charlie cards to incoming freshmen and like a little pamphlet that's like, here's how to use the T, which like I think many people remember I'm trying to do for Simmons kids this semester, or next semester. So I was really excited about that. And so talking to students was one of the things that we talked about. Like I think that if students put pressure on their administration, like this could be a thing. And we need it to be on all levels, but I think Sophie and I were especially interested in working with students and trying to push this forward.
So one comment on that, I can't remember if I've talked to this group before about Boston Civic Media, but most of the universities have been participating, so it's a concept that came out of Media Lab at MIT, 4 years ago or so. And basically, it's aimed at getting university students to quite quickly get up to speed on data, but more importantly, on how to communicate issues clearly and organize around them. So a couple of years ago, they switched the head of the umbrella to Emerson because they're a communications-based school, and they flipped back to MIT if there's some data challenges. But last year, there were 14 semester courses at Boston Civic Media across the universities, and they were focused on climate and sustainability. And I wonder if a group like that might be, in addition to the individual university climate or sustainability advocacy groups, might be something that could unify and maybe push a little bit, help push forward. So just throw that out there.
Yeah, that definitely sounds. Thank you.
And then they had an event a month or so ago at the new theater, the Majestic, that Emerson has redone. They did lightning rounds with a lot of different groups, but I'm sure they'll be ramping up again. So maybe I don't know if you're the right person. I'll just send you some data.
Yeah, that would be great.
Some contacts.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you. Sorry, was someone else? I thought of something, but then I forgot.
Well, then maybe while I'm talking, because we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So Brian was very enthusiastic. Seems like a good guy. I suspect he is the continuation of the University Pass initiative that went alongside the Youth Pass initiative, which did come to this successful conclusion.
Right.
The University Pass was pulled over to, let me rephrase that. Stephanie Pollock took that under her wing, and I suspect the egg, which is Brian Corey, is the hatchling that is now in charge of the pass program. And so he's not only doing University Pass, but he's also doing corporate pass. And so we will be interacting with him more. He has some ideas about how to make the corporate pass have greater penetrance. Essentially, there is a tax benefit that everyone gets if they use the corporate pass program. And so companies need to be more aware of that, so that operate to their employees. And so he's really working on that. I think we understand is that they are going to rebrand the corporate pass program, and once that rebranding is done, then he feels that he can get Jim Rooney, who's the head of or the executive director for the Boston Chamber of Commerce, to take that to his members and get them to push it. He has talked with them already. The understanding is that he just needs something to take to the members in order to get them more excited about it. And there does seem to be some legislation that is geared around getting people to reduce their SOV, single occupancy vehicle traffic into town. So we have a bit of a legislative framework for that. I want to investigate that some more because it's not clear to me what kind of accounting is going on for that. Like, how are they tracking what companies are doing? Washington has that also. It seems like they have a little more robust system for tracking what's going on. But at least we have the legislative framework for it, which is great. So I think maybe we can move that. Another thing that was interesting too is that he gave an anecdote of his younger sibling who uses Uber and Lyft to get around and not the T, and when asked what could we do to get him to go to use the T, was it all clear on what that would be? And I actually think that's an issue, and so I like to see some packages kind of built around using TNCs as part of the transit system, and much like David said, we can give you a certain amount of money, to use these TNCs if you use them in a way, that we think is better for overall transportation. Meaning it has to be a shared, situation, within a certain amount of distance from the MBTA network. I think we can do stuff like that, and bring them on board, with a pass system that makes them part of the transportation system. So we'll be talking to him more. But he's very energetic, and very enthusiastic, and really looks forward to working with us.
Yeah, that reminded me, the bus stigma, that was what I was going to talk about.
Right, that was funny.
Yeah, one of the, so, I don't remember if he's told this story or somebody told this story, but like someone at Northeastern was like, I didn't even know you could use the Charlie card on a bus, and we were like, what?
Yeah.
So there's just a real, I know.
I only take the T, I don't take the bus.
Yeah, that was the thing that came up, like, where people think the T is just the subway, and so, I mean, and that's like people who have lived here for a minute, and so like incoming students like really need a lot of guidance on this. So like, I think I'm like, what Sophie and I are thinking about is like the University Pass program as part of a larger like transit advocacy project that is designed to like get people using transit. And the earlier you use transit in your life, the more likely you are to use it later. Did you guys know that? That's true. Early investment in getting people onto the train is great. Or the bus, even better. But yeah, and there's like a lot of like unsureness around the bus. It's more confusing than the subway. It's easy to get lost if you don't know an area. So thinking about when we not just giving students like passes, but also like the ability to navigate things.
Terrific, thank you. And Craig?
Yes. So anyone who was actually at the meeting, as opposed to another coach like myself, can feel free to jump in where I'm.
Oh, you weren't there, were you?
I was not, but I have the notes. Thanks to Andy. So thank you to Andy for typing up notes for me. And folks can kind of jump on here and add more to it. So one of the first topic of discussion is the Better Bus Project. The Better Bus Project is hosting regular chats at MBTA bus stops and asking open-ended questions from passengers. That's one area of discussion. Next, we got an update on the hiring of additional bus operators. We all know that we have a challenge in terms of getting bus operators and covering routes at times. They just hired 70 new bus operators, half of which are covering for unexpected call-outs, and the other half are for additional service.
I don't think they hired 70. I think that they got budgeting for 70.
Okay.
So there's budgeting for 70, and 35 would be actual, full-time employees, and they got a line item for 35 to be subs, I think. But they haven't hired.
Gotcha. Thank you for the correction there. But that hire specifically to cover the call-outs is interesting, because that we've had multiple conversations in that subcommittee about how the drop trips is directly related to not having coverage. So to have a pool of resources being hired to cover those, that is very interesting.
They also, just so you know, when the red line is down, they pull buses off other routes.
Yeah.
Right, there was a lot of discussion on that every time there's a problem, then the bus drivers have reached their 40 hours before you get to the end of the week, and there was a lot of trips that
group talked about two different incidents. There was the Green Line incident on 712, where there was a broken rail at the Riverway stop on the eastbound track. We also talked about a red line emergency, medical emergency on 712, where a passenger was nearly hit by a train at Central Square Station. Anybody have anything to add on those two
I
discussions?
think we discussed the woman at Mass Ave Orange Line who got her leg caught between and just sort of the outcome of that. She got her leg caught between the right in the gap, and then all the passengers who had seen some YouTube video of something that happened in Australia got out of the car and pushed the subway to free her leg. But she had something of a degloving injury where and she was screaming that she didn't have the money for the ambulance. But and we had seen some kids right afterwards that had been there, and they were very shaken by that. But she got to the hospital.
And then the last item I have here of note is you connect with Bill Wolfgang to decide whether how we can see the new Orange Line cars or Green Line cars.
That'd be great fun if we did a field trip.
And so there was a question earlier as to whether we're going to have a meeting in August. Have you decided?
I think we should not have a meeting in August of the subcommittee. Any objections to not having a meeting in August?
No objections.
Primarily because I don't think I can make that meeting either.
I suggest that we replace the meeting with some other type of event that's entirely optional. And if I'm the only one going to it, fine, I'll just take a tour of something by myself, because I'm just that kind of guy.
Send if anybody can arrange.
Well, do you want to do two, like, and then one with that committee and then one with Full Rock? Is that what you?
I guess to be determined. I guess I'll come up with some ideas and put it on the mailing list, and we'll go from there. And if I don't come up with any ideas that seem interesting, you don't hear anything from me, then enjoy the month off. But it'll be optional anyway, you know. If I can come up with something fun.
I'm sure the air conditioning condition.
That's a good point. Yeah, I want to make sure it's air conditioned. Yeah, you know me.
I know you.
Okay, now we're on the item on the agenda for reports and external meetings, old business, new business.
So, external meetings. We are part of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, and they did a field trip to the air traffic.
I'm sorry, I really feel bad for interrupting, but from my notes, we could clarify who exactly is we're referring to.
The Regional Transportation Advisory Council is part of the.
I'm sorry, the we before that.
Oh, so we as in the ROC. Being the Ride Oversight Committee, so we are part of the RTAC, the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, which is a group that is a subgroup of the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization, and so we did a field trip to Logan Airport, to the air traffic control.
Very cool.
It was very cool. It was very, very cool indeed. And so it lasted like 3 hours and got a understanding how that whole system worked, and got to go to the top of and I have to tell you, the most impressive part about it was just how relaxed it is up there. It's just very relaxed. I mean, they have their routine down. You know, they're on headsets, so they're talking to headsets. We had to be quiet when we're talking. We didn't have to whisper, but quiet, laid back. I mean, no dress code.
Do they all wear shirts like you?
You know, they were either t-shirts or shirts like this, untucked, shorts. The supervisors, which were two women, were a little better dressed. And to be honest, I can tell. And forgive me if this is not PCB. I wasn't sure if it's just that women just tend to care a bit more about
They have to.
They
have to.
Yeah.
You get punished if you don't. You have to care if you're a woman, because you get punished if you don't.
Well, maybe that's it, but the whole deal was that, but I think also they were supervisory, and I talked to someone else who said, usually who works with NASA and goes to, who says that usually the supervisors are a little, the folks, both genders who were dealing with the planes themselves, I mean, it was just very laid back. I mean, it was just kind of refreshing to see. And the guy who gave us a tour just said, yeah, we're all about, you know, what we have to just be confident. I mean, there's so many things, you know, that you have to do. Is like how especially since the folks on the planes don't see them anyways. I mean, it's
right,
like, you know,
exactly.
you really just have to be able to communicate, you know, what it is, you know, that they need to know. But the level of redundancy, you know, is pretty impressive. You know, what was clear is that, I mean, the tower, I guess itself is about 45 years old. You know, I guess it was built in 75 or something like that. You know, and whereas they could use a newer and better one, there's no place to build it. So it's like there's no real estate for it. You know, so it's like it used to be the tallest one. You know, I think it used to be the tallest one in the world, but now it's been replaced by a couple others. You know, so yeah, that was cool. You know, and the other report is from once again related to the Boston MBTA. We've been working on this equity policy. It's called disproportionate impacts. Disparate impact, disproportionate burden, EPDI. I'm just going to call it equity for the long range transportation plan. And I guess it's probably not us. I mean, I'm not going to say the conclusion exactly now. I'm going to leave that for the report itself, which is going to come out in September. I think it'd be okay, but just I'm going to err on the side of caution. But it was 4 meetings, you know, 3 of which was with the working group, which we were part of, and some other stakeholders, and then one was a general public meeting that was held, I think, in Roxbury. And the last meeting, we were asked to come to a conclusion, and it was 12, 13 of us there. It was a consensus, a unanimous consensus. I mean, it's like that's, and it wasn't forced either. It wasn't like you had to get like one person, you know, to come along with the rest of the group. It was like the whole group kind of went in that direction. So that was something you don't tend to see with that sort of that size group, you know. But I have to say, it was very well run by Betsy Harvey, the CTPS, Central Transportation Planning staff, and it's a hard problem, you know, and I mean, one of the issues that I see, and I'll pursue this later on, is just that these, you know, they're trying to do projections for 20 years out. You're using, what's the model called, Wig? The transportation model. Is it the transit model? It's not the transit model, it's the transportation.
No, well,
what's the model
I
called?
usually call it the TAZ model, but I usually call it the TAZ model because they use transportation analysis zones, which are a little bit different from census geography, because their boundaries are drawn by transportation intensity as opposed to population intensity.
Right.
But they have a relational database.
Right.
And I'll just say one other. Well, let you finish, and then I'll come back to that.
Yeah. Well, it's just that they're trying to take into account, you know, changes in population, land use, and stuff like that. And it's just that, you know, the further out in time you go, the bigger your uncertainties become. So if you are going to be contrasting, you know, a build scenario versus a no build scenario, I mean, it's going to be hard with inputs, you know, that diverge so widely 20 years out to get a big difference between the two, a difference that is statistically significant. And so I think one of the issues is just trying to project so far out. But it is what it is, you know. So, but anyways, I mean, the process itself was very good, and to the extent, I mean, with all these things, we try, and you may not. You come to a conclusion, and you have to revisit it, you know, but as long as you have a good process, I mean, I think you can more likely get to a good policy, I mean, on your next iterations versus like saying I have no confidence in people running the show. I wouldn't want to be a part of it. I mean, that was not the case at all. I mean, I would gladly be a part of that process again. So, on behalf of us. So that's it.
Thank you. Any other,
Well, I think you want to.
oh, sorry.
Well, I guess two tiny things. You know, first, the MPO and MAPC, which is the land use planning partner, have very good staffs. With regard to, so I went to the first equity meeting, not the others. When you look at disparity and include health and pollution and things like that, the greatest disparities are at the smallest geographical level units. And the analysis is fully aggregated to the whole region. So from my point of view, that's an approach problem. Because if you're really trying to find the disparities, where you find them is in the TAZ level, which is about a third of the census tract. And so I'll just state that and leave it there. And but related to that, there has not been a new regional land use plan in quite a while. It's overdue. So the way surface transportation planning works at the MPO, at the kind of core base level, is it has to be put on top of a land use and population analysis. So socioeconomic, jobs, housing, different types of populations, and then the surface transportation analysis, which so MAPC does that, and it's Tim Reardon is in charge of that at MAPC. He's a veteran. He's really good at it, and they're about to ramp up with a new regional land use plan. It won't be quite as robust or long term as the last one, but it'll take a couple years, and that will be a completely different platform for then analyzing surface transportation, both road, rail, freight, transit. And Scott Peterson's groups at the MPO, who do all the data and number crunching, will work hand in hand with Tim Reardon at MAPC on that. So that's something, I mean, Len will definitely be on top of that because he's been following the MPO a little more than most ROC members, and also RTAC. But that's something people should probably be aware of, because that's a really interesting process that doesn't happen very often. So I'm going to stop there. I have a couple of new business comments, but I'll wait for that section.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this point, and we will be on top of that, and I'm going to push that in RTAC, is that we get more, input on that for this current LRTP. If there's any way we can get, some good MAP, the stuff that MAPC provides to them, sooner, rather than waiting, until they go through this process, which I think is going to be another 2 or 3 years, which would be effective for the current LRTP cycle that we're going through.
Right, no, that's correct. So this new land use plan and the hand-in-hand work of MAPC and the MPO will then be the platform for surface transportation planning for quite a while forward.
But with respect to the first thing you said, though, and we kind of brought this up in the last meeting, it's just that it's incumbent, because the LRTP is a conglomeration of a bunch of projects. I mean, that's why you look at it in total. But each of the projects is supposed to be evaluated for all of these things. So if you do have like a plan that's going to be, let's say in Roxbury, then there's supposed to be an impact analysis with respect to particulates and everything else that's supposed to be done. And actually Betsy says she's the one that does that. And so each plan should have its own DBI analysis. I guess we have to make sure that we're not making kind of a theoretical mistake or kind of like an additive mistake where it's like you assume that A plus B equals C, and it's not something else. It's like that. It's not maybe an additional operation.
Look, they're good. I just will repeat though that it's hard to get the granular data, and that's where some of the most serious issues are the smallest granules of data. And Scott Peterson has a good reason for not liking to hand that out, because he's sensitive to the estimates and things like that. And so, responsible people worry about it getting in the wrong hands, and people just using it to tout one philosophy or another, as opposed for its base level of information. But from my point of view, to not be able to have access to and use the data in its real granularity really clouds a lot of the issues that pop out when you look at it in the granularity. So that's an ongoing issue for me. I don't need to bother other people.
For Jake's sake, MBTA is Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Can you give an example of the sort of granularity? Like, are you thinking about like comparing neighborhood to neighborhood versus like municipality to municipality, or?
Well, a little bit of both, but you know, where it really pops out is, for example, Sullivan Square. There's 800,000 vehicle miles per square mile per day driven on the roadways. That is an astounding amount of pollution. And you know, you can't see that in the aggregated data. 75% of the planning region is really clean and has a tiny percent of that pollution and health impact.
So then that just gets spread out across that larger
population
area, and then you
is
lose the
first and foremost immigrant population.
Okay, thank you. That's a great
so
example.
Those are the kinds of issues that pop out. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else with any external meetings or any old business or new business?
I actually have a new business thing myself. Does anyone know what the old people who've been here for longer, like what the change in public attendance of this meeting is? Like over time, other than Rock members, what has been the population of these meetings?
It's varied. It it's varied.
It depends on what the hot button issue is at the moment.
Yeah.
When there was a fair policy change in the works, I think we had the highest for each of the past during the time that the Rocks existed.
Yeah. We've had our regulars at times.
Yep.
You know, and sometimes not needed. And like 2 or 3 months ago, we had some folks from Chiefs showed up with an issue, and haven't heard from them again. Even though we invited them, you know, to get back to us, you know, to follow through with their issue. At least I haven't heard anything from them. I don't know if anyone else has heard.
And we used to have advocacy groups. So when it started, it was, you know, the Conservation Law Foundation was here.
Sierra Club.
Yeah, that was
Four Quarters.
I think the one thing to check is just to make sure that these are being posted in the appropriate places.
Yeah, post on the website.
And then people aren't going to the Rock website all the time. It would be on the MBTA calendar or the NASDAQ calendar.
It is nice.
All the Rock meetings are covered on the MBTA official events calendar at least until December 2018, I think.
Yeah.
She put them up until.
Yeah.
We're not meeting in August though, right?
Yeah, we have to make that correction.
Yeah. I mean, I see them listed when you go to the FMCB meeting, well, the meeting list there, maybe, so.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that's.
Was that
We
based?
have somebody from the MBTA, you're from the MBTA, right?
Who, me?
Yeah, no?
I am.
Do you want to say something?
No, I don't need to say anything. I'm Dave Perry. I'm a project manager in the Capital Delivery Department, and I am working on the AFC 2.0 project.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to hear what David has.
Your Capital Delivery, huh?
Yes.
Oh, well, CIF would be delighted to talk with you sometimes.
But he's not just Dave Perry, he's the Dave Perry. No, seriously, for what, 10 or 12 years, you had probably the most detailed blog and analysis of Framingham, Worcester issues and greater MBTA issues. I mean,
yes.
Do you want to just plug for?
Well, I did. I started as an advocate for the commuter rail, for particularly the Worcester Framingham line, and I got sucked in. So yeah, it's worked out well. I'm happy with it.
They knew that you didn't cry.
Yeah, but for the record, I seriously recommend that if you haven't already seen anything that Dave's produced in the past, Google for David B. Perry or
just Dave Framingham Worcester.
Dave Framingham Worcester. Yeah. No, seriously. I mean, he's produced articles in depth with numeric analysis. I mean, really phenomenal work for somebody who wasn't employed by the MBTA until what, a year ago?
Yeah, about a year.
Yeah, you really should look up David's David Perry, Framingham, Worcester.
I'm just hearing capital. He had me a capital. Because we're all about that. Really, I'm serious.
Yeah.
It'd be great to talk to you.
I gotta find out if I'm allowed to, but yeah, that's all.
Yeah, you know, I mean, for some reason, I mean, along that track of the system, I mean, it's like, you know, they have to get authorization. Other tracks of the system don't need authorization at all. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, whatever we need to do, you know.
Yeah.
We don't fight.
Yeah, it's great that you could be here tonight.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so I have two pretty simple new old business.
Just a time check, folks, it is 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I'll be really quick.
Okay, so we also have to have a public comment period too.
I've been noticing that the escalators are out a lot more. The escalators have been out at Porter a lot. I don't know who uses the Porter station, but those are really long escalators. Sometimes 2 of the 3 are out. And also at Sullivan, which I use, there's been more escalators out. And it's actually the worst I've seen it in probably 15 years.
So maybe we can get somebody who does the contract, find out why.
Well, last time, you know, it got cleaned up because Dave Grabowskis was in charge of stuff, and he was just like, you know, I brought it up at Sullivan and said, you know, it's not life or death. He said, no, that's really serious. I'll fix it within 6 weeks. We'll get that fixed. So there's some fall off in attention to that, and I mean, Porter, it's been like a year. This stuff is on, it's off, it's.
So we should bring that up at ops probably.
Yeah, and I don't attend ops as much, so that's something that I'm just throwing out there, and if I get to ops and someone's there, I'll ask them. The second thing is a different question. With the Green Line project in Somerville, which, you know, clearly doesn't have the same regional concern as when they replaced the 14 bridges in I-93, 14 weekends, or, you know, the BU bridge, which they do over the weekend, and they're really careful that working during the week. Some bridges will be out for a year on major roadways like Broadway. So if you're going to Tufts on buses, you're not going on Broadway because the bridge is going to be out. And same with Washington Street between Sullivan Square and Union Square, which is a major route. There are going to be major outages of that road for months.
Who's in charge of the bridges?
Well, this is all part of the Greenland project. So, you know, something like Washington Street being out would mean that Rutherford Avenue in Charlestown will get crunched because McGrath and O'Brien will not be an option for people who use Washington Street off of I-93, going to Kendall Square or downtown Boston. So I don't know who to bring that up with.
The Green Line project people.
Well, no, this is just, they've already said that, but clearly the operations people are going to be the ones on the ground getting honked at.
No, but to get the bridge done, isn't it the?
No, it's a strict budget. It's
whose project?
Well, it's basically a
Who's paying for it? MassDOT?
MassDOT MBTA is paying for the project.
No, who's paying for the bridge?
It's within the project, and it's going to cause major on-the-ground problems.
But I'm trying to help you find out who you should.
There is no budget in the project for it.
So the bridge will never get done?
No, the bridge will be done, but they're going to be shut down for vastly longer periods of time than with other similar capital scale projects.
If I want to make sure that we get our public comment time in, and it's almost 5 after 7.
Yeah, the second question is, so there will be a lot of bus rerouting with those bridges shut down because they're major bus routes. And somebody just asked, well, will they add a couple buses to the routes to keep the schedules somewhat on time? So I'm just throwing that out there too.
Yeah, well, we've got to find out.
Yeah, but we can't debate this given the time left.
What should we do about it? Who should we be pressing?
Subcommittee.
I don't know.
Public comment now. Do we have any public comments?
Just something fast.
Please take your time.
Barry Steinberg, I just want to report that as of last week, I could see at Boylston Station, I could see some steel actually going up, as opposed to dirt being moved. That's a progress, that's progress.
We're only went a bit over, but.
All right, cool. See you all.
It was our first meeting.
We'll see you in September. Unless you do a field trip.
Now, what are we doing on the is there an executive meeting next month?
Great.
I don't know. We decide when to do that.
People watching online,
It would be
thank
good to
you
be
for
able to touch base.
I did.